going to call the teaching the science of mind and spirit, but the truth is there wasn't enough room on the sign in front of the Institute, so he just made it the science of mind. Just one of those, one of those interesting stories, I guess. And by mind is a euphemism for the creative intelligence of the universe, for spirit, for God. This idea of an infinite intelligence that contains within it all of creation, that the creation is the physical expression of that intelligence that is universal, that is beyond our comprehension. Am I doing that, or is someone else doing that? He says there's a power in the universe greater than we are. There is an intelligence acting as law that receives the impress of our thoughts as we think them. It is creative, and it always tends to create for us the conditions we think about and accept. The conditions we think about and accept. So it's not only your thoughts, it's the thoughts that you accept at the subconscious level. That part of your mind that is really the main part of your mind. It's vast, and it's not individual to you. It's the part of your mind that continues downward into the universal, that we are all one, all connected, that we have access to this universal mind, and that we think into it and that we receive out of it. That we have access to everything in the infinite mind, but we can only accept what we can accept. Now, I know, before I knew about this teaching, I really used to think that I was open to all good. If I were to walk up to you and say, would you like more good in your life, you probably wouldn't say no, would you? And yet you don't have more good in your life than you have right now. You have what you have. So is it an issue of being willing to have more? And I'm willing to have more. But have I accepted that I can have more? Hi, Soren. There's Reverend Carol and Soren out there. Soren was in the emergency room over the weekend. But he's a boy. That's what boys do. And he's okay now. He's okay. Okay. Yeah. What was I talking about? It's all one thing, right? So I would think, well, gee, I would like to have more of whatever it is I was thinking about at the moment. More money or a nicer car, a bigger house, whatever it is. More adulation, whatever it is you're thinking about you'd like to have. And the question is, why don't I have it? And I used to believe that I didn't have it because the powers that be, my idea of God was saying, this is all you can have. See? And the reason I couldn't have more was not because I couldn't think more expansively, it was because I couldn't be more obedient. I was supposed to be obedient to the doctrine, the dogma of the specific, of the church and of my family and so forth, And a lot of the dogma in my family, I don't know about your family, a lot of the dogma in my family was the world's really a hard place and it's really tough to be happy. So if you were to be, in order to be an accepted member of the family, you had to kind of agree with that position. But that's okay because I didn't know another position. And when I went to school, in a Catholic school, and I went to church, I didn't hear a message too different from that. In fact, I heard a message that often said, the idea is not to have more and to be happier. The idea is to suffer more so that you would be rewarded in the next life. I got to tell you, I didn't like that at 7. But I didn't know any better, right? So I tried to suffer, but I didn't really suffer well. I wasn't a good sufferer. I wasn't a joyful sufferer. I would try to have a lot of more joy and happiness in my life, and a lot of which was identified as sinful. See? What are you smiling about? Oh, sorry, I was thinking an impure thought, So Dr. Holm, when I got into this teaching and I'm hearing, the first time I heard there's a power in the universe greater than you are, and you can use it, I thought, oh, that's blasphemy. Because the God I had learned about growing up didn't entertain my wishes or I could pray, but the answer was often no. And that no was based on kind of whim, what kind of mood God was in that day. And I would wonder, and sometimes I'd say, well, God wasn't available to hear your prayer. I figured he was in China or something that day when I was praying, and he couldn't hear me through the earth. When you're a kid, you figure out why things work or why they don't. And no one told me that was wrong because I didn't tell them what I was thinking. So I kept getting wronger and wronger about reality. Ralph Waldo Trine, who was one of the early New Thought writers, wrote this: "The great central fact of the universe is that spirit of infinite love and power that is back of all, that animates all, that manifests itself in and through all, that self-existent principle of life from which all life has come." So the shift for me in coming into this teaching was away from a God who was a being with a personality, who had a form, who lived in a physical place called heaven, and who was kind of judgmental, who you had to please and who was impossible to please, to the idea of something closer to the Force in Star Wars, which I'd seen by that point. The idea of not so much this personality, in fact, no personality, but in fact, an intelligence, a force available to all of us, and it interacted with us according to our consciousness. So as I see the world and I come to accept the way the world is, the world tends to appear that way to me on a regular basis. And when I change my mind about how the world is different. And once I began to understand that and get a sense of it, I could see that had been true throughout my whole life. But I wasn't taught to see it that way. I was taught to see it as stuff happens and you try to cope or react to it. Not seeing myself as a creative energy or a creative force in that what manifests itself in my world. In other words, in what happens. Am I co-creating what happens or not? Well, I am. But if I don't believe I am, I won't act like I am. My teacher, Dr. Bill Tolliver, used to talk about, said, imagine there's a guy standing on the corner with a 2x4 in his hand, and he's hitting himself in the head over and over, going thonk, 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 thonk. And somebody comes and says, what are you doing? And what do you mean, what am I doing? Thonk, thonk, thonk. Well, you're hitting yourself in your head. No, I'm not. This board is just hitting me. I have nothing to do with it. See? Because his belief was that that's the way life was. So he didn't question what was happening. Many people have suffering and misery in their lives that they don't question because the worldview is that that's the way it's supposed to be. And yet the same people will question too much good in their life. Oh my goodness, well, I don't know, I've had 3 days in a row with no problems. Something bad must be right around the corner. You see? Gay Hendricks calls that the upper limits problem. How much good can you stand before you get nervous? See? Some people can be depressed for 3 months and have 3 good days and get worried. They're okay with the depression, that's normal, but, well, I've been feeling really good. Something must be the matter. It's interesting, but see, we get conditioned. It's conditioning. It's how we're conditioned to believe. When you go back to that first quote, what we think about and accept. And accept. Thomas Troward said, if thought power is good for anything, it is good for everything. If it can produce one thing, it can produce all things. For what is to hinder it? Nothing can stop us from thinking. We can think what we please. And if to think is to form, then we can form what we please. Now, the difficulty here is that it's not a perfectly linear relationship. Because you think you kind of know what your thoughts are, although you're not always paying attention, right? Really, some of the day you're kind of on autopilot, right? Like before you've had your coffee. Some people don't wake up till 10:30. They've been at work for 2 hours. All of a sudden, oh, I'm here. How'd you get here? I don't know. I guess my car's in the parking lot. I don't know, right? Or you go on autopilot. You kind of go on autopilot. When you're on autopilot, all you're doing is rethinking existing belief-driven thoughts. You don't get creative on autopilot. But generally, we can be aware of our thinking. And then that doesn't necessarily perfectly match up to our experience because we're only aware of some of it. So, for example, let's say you get a cold. And you might say, well, gee, I wasn't thinking about getting a cold last week, so where'd this cold come from? You see. But maybe you were thinking some kind of negative, fear-based, depressing thoughts during the previous week, and the result of that physiologically was to lower your immune system a bit, because your immune system responds to that kind of thing, mainly the emotional piece of it. And your immune system is down, and there's a little viral bug in there that was in your system anyway, but that your immune system, because it's kind of lowered, the bug gets into the system in a little more powerful way, and you manifest a cold. So there's not necessarily a linear relationship between the content of my thought last week and the experience this week, but there is a linear relationship between the emotional context, what Holmes called the thought atmosphere, which is the tendency of my thought that includes my emotions as I go through the day. Your emotions arise as a result of your thinking and your experiences. A lot of times we think we're reacting to our emotions, but the emotions are usually triggered by thoughts that we have. And it may not be, it may not be a current thought. You may encounter something that triggers an old idea, and then you have an emotional response to it. Or reaction, really. It's not really a response, it's more of a reaction. It's automatic. An example of that, an example of an automatic emotional response is an attitude. Anyone ever had an attitude? Okay. Yeah. Now, you can have positive attitudes or negative attitudes. And in an airplane, if you're a pilot, you talk about the attitude, which is the relationship of the wings to the horizon. And it can either be positive or negative. So a positive attitude simply means that it's an emotional set that kind of makes you feel drawn towards something. You might have a positive attitude toward chocolate, for example. Okay, so, chocolate, or golf, golf, tell me more, And then you might have a negative attitude toward things. You might have a negative attitude toward, I don't know, something that isn't chocolate, So when you have a negative attitude towards something, and it shows up in your experience somehow, you tend to withdraw from it, want to get away from it. See? Now, the interesting thing about attitudes is you don't know you've got one until it shows up. Where'd that attitude come from? Were you born with it? Probably not. It was probably a learned condition. I'll give you an example. You ever walk into the wrong restroom? Unintentionally. Because intentionally shows a whole different attitude. But unintentionally, you walk in and what happens? You realize you're in the wrong restroom. And then what happens? There's this whole emotional response, And you don't have to think, okay, now wait a minute, I'm in the wrong restroom. Okay, I need emotions. No, it just comes up. It just shows up. Why is that? Because you've been conditioned that you don't belong there. See? From the time you were little. So you've got this built-up consciousness that says, I belong here, I don't belong here. When I go into a place I don't belong, and I realize it, I get this flood of emotion. See? Now, where'd that come from? Well, it came from a mindset that I had accepted at some point prior to that. Now, you also have attitudes, and I have attitudes about what's good in my life and what isn't. I have an attitude about how much good I can stand. how much good I deserve, maybe. You know, if you think about, if you get a paycheck, let's say, and you know, probably even if you don't currently in that situation, at some point in your life you've probably gotten a paycheck. And you'd get that paycheck every week, every 2 weeks, every month, whatever it is, and you look at the amount, and it would kind of, yeah, that's how much I make. Well, what if all of a sudden, out of the blue, it was tripled? You probably, oh, you know. Initially, you might say, oh, good. Then you think, oh, there's a mistake, right? Or what if it was 1/10 of what you thought it was going to be? See, you'd have an attitude about it, right? There would be, oh, this isn't right, or this is, you know, it isn't right good, it isn't right bad. The attitude of what I accept is when things feel normal. That's when I'm in what they call my comfort zone, where, oh yeah, that's what I expect. You know. Now, if you do get a paycheck and you look at it and it's what you expect, then that's within your comfort zone. You may say, I'd like to make more, but you don't. See, in order to make more, and for you to accept having more, you have to up-level your belief and the attitudes about what you're worth, what you expect, what you think you should earn. It's not just a matter of saying, I'm underpaid. Because if I'm continually underpaid, what I've convinced myself of is I somehow deserve to be underpaid, or the world's unfair, or something. I'll make a rationalization for why it's limited. And again, when I was in my old mindset, I would think all that was controlled outside of me. You know, that whoever I worked for determined all that kind of thing, and what the world was like, and so forth. And, you know, people tell you, you're lucky to even have a job. You know? Really? Well, thanks. Boy, yeah, I guess I am. You know, so give me less. I'll still feel lucky. You know, and there's all kinds of situations where they've done studies of people that lose their jobs. And if you got somebody that makes, say, $500,000 a year and they lose their job, and you got somebody else that makes $50,000 a year and they lose their job, and you get somebody else that makes $20,000 a year and they lose their job, the next job they get, guess what? They tend to be about at the same level of the one they lost. Which tells me what? It's not just an objective reality out there. If I make $500,000 a year and I lose my job, I probably don't go to Walmart and ask for an application. See, I wouldn't see myself doing that. But if I got laid off or fired from Walmart, I probably don't walk into ExxonMobil and say, I'd like to see an application for CEO, please. I think that's the next job for me. Right? You kind of go where you think you'll fit. You kind of go where you think it's right for you. And what determines that? Your idea about yourself. Now, yeah, in some places you need to have, you know, you say, okay, you need to have this much experience for this job or whatever, but it's still how you see yourself. You know, somebody gets those really good jobs, and they all started out with no experience. So how did they end up there and somebody else ends up over here? It's belief system, it's attitude. Dr. Holmes said you are using the law of life every time you think. And by the law of life, he simply means this mechanism of using your psychology, your mind, to create what you will accept, create your own experience or expectation of reality, and the universe complies with that. That's the law. You know, it said in the Bible, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. You know, this is not new stuff. The understanding the psychology of it's relatively new. But the idea that as we think we are is a very ancient concept. Because when you understand it and you see it, it's self-evident. So you're using the law of life every time you think, no matter how long you may have been using it wrongly in your ignorance, the very day, that hour, yes, the very moment you begin to use this power rightly, the effects of having used it wrongly will pass from your experience. In other words, you're not held back by past ideas once you get a new idea. You're not held back by past sense of self, belief system, once you get a new belief. That old is released. And you're able to step into the new. But if I don't understand that, I don't understand the nature of how reality works, I may sit back and wait for the world to call me forth. You know? Because it's not up to me. If it's not up to me, if the power's outside of me, then I've got to wait for it to be recognized or identified or someone, how many times do you fantasize if you're working in a company or working in an organization about the boss coming, oh, by the way, I've been meaning to talk to you. I want you to come upstairs to the executive offices because we've recognized your ability. And you probably do have the ability to be up there. But it doesn't happen that way. The people that are up there didn't get there that way necessarily. Some of them did. They were relatives, but that's another story. What's your consciousness about what kind of relatives you have? That's another talk. But the people that are at that level, that are operating at that level of what? If it's really just about accepting greater responsibility, are there by right of consciousness. We're all wherever we are by right of consciousness, which means the interaction of the law, mind with a capital M with mind with a small m. In other words, my mind and the universal mind. I think and I accept in my mind, and the universal mind says, right you are. It says yes to whatever I decide is so at the deep level of my being. Now, you can believe something at the deep level of your being that isn't so. Matter of fact, we all do that to some extent. But we act like it's so. Anyone ever been wrong? Right? We've talked about this before. Of course, we've all been wrong. We've all been mistaken. And how does it feel to be mistaken? Well, it feels bad, it feels clumsy, whatever. But no, that's when you find out you're wrong. What about when you were wrong before you knew you were wrong? It felt just like being right. It's true. So whatever I believe and have accepted at the subconscious part of my being feels like I'm right. The universe mirrors it back to me, so I assume I am right. But probably what it is, I can almost always assume I'm operating at a limited level, that I have the capacity to grow beyond that, to accept something greater. And I'm not just talking about more money and more stuff. I'm talking about a greater capacity for your own creative expression, which may secondarily bring in more money and more stuff, if that's what you desire. I'm talking about being conscious of relationships and being conscious of your own ability to give love and to express love, rather than thinking, I don't have anything to give, I have to wait for someone to give to me. So all of these things are, all of these ways of thinking, they actually control your life. They become the law of your life. What you believe subconsciously is the law of your life because it controls how you experience that life. There are people that wonderful things happen to that they can't accept. Look at the statistics on people that win the lottery and what happens to them over the next 5 years. Some of them win a whole lot of money, so it takes a long time to get rid of it. But if I have a consciousness of, whatever, let's say $50,000 a year, and I get my paycheck, which is $1,000 a week less taxes and less deductions, and I look at that and say, that's me, and all of a sudden I win all this money, and I haven't changed my consciousness. I've just got all this extra stuff. I may not be able to deal with that in a joyous, healthy way. I may not be able to deal with the fact that many people are going to treat me differently because of that. And there are many people that have won the lottery that have gone bankrupt. Because, when sanity and success are in competition, sanity will win. Sanity is the world has to look the way I think it is. And if something gets thrown out of whack, way good or way bad, I will work to get back to where I think I belong. And I'll do that subconsciously and automatically. So there's a power in the universe that is greater than you are, and you can use it. You can use it by training yourself to think in a direction in which you want to go and not allowing yourself to dwell in negatives, to dwell in limitation. You know, there's a book from years ago, it's called You Can't Afford the Luxury of a Negative Thought. And there's a lot of truth to that, because every thought is creative. Every thought has an element within it that is active, that helps to build beliefs within. William James, one of the founders of American psychology, said every thought has an ideomotor action. And the example we always use is it's like the seed that's planted by the farmer into the creative medium of the soil. Now, what determines what plant grows from that seed? Does the soil determine it? No, because if you plant tomato seeds, you don't get carrots, right? So the intelligence of the future manifestation, the plant, is in the seed. And the seed is planted into the creative medium, the soil, where there's nurturants and so forth, and it germinates. In other words, it's accepted at that level, and then the plant grows out of that using the nutrients from the soil to create the manifest form, but the blueprint, the plan, the idea is in the seed. So your conscious thoughts are like seeds. They have ideas in them. They have intelligence in them. They have direction. And you plant the seed in the creative medium of your subconscious mind, which provides everything necessary to manifest according to that thought and the beliefs that are formed by it. So I can't create greater good in my life if I'm thinking about what a rotten world it is and how people are unfair and how you can't get a break. That's like saying I'm going to plant tomato seeds when I'm going to get carrots. You can't do it. There has to be a direct link between the quality of your thinking and the result. So what I'd like you to do this week, if you haven't already done this, or if you've done it, do it again, is just notice what happens during the week. Just notice in general, it might be repetitive stuff, whatever. What happens? How are your relationships at home, when you're out during the day, when you go into the coffee shop or something? How is the relationship? Is it curt? Is it quiet? Is it friendly? Whatever it is, just notice. Don't try to change it. Just notice how your day goes. When you get home and go to bed, how do you feel? Are you in a good space? Or are you exhausted? You're just like, oh, God, this is awful. I don't want to do this again tomorrow. But notice. And as you notice that, maybe even write it down in a little journal. Do a little check-in of where am I as I go through my day. And then see if you can trace back. How did I get the idea that my life was this way? And see if there isn't, not so much the specific thoughts, but the way you feel when you think. Because if every time I go into the bank, I get a surly teller, let's say, that's how I would describe it. I don't feel good about it. Am I paying? How come that happens to me? And how come the person next to me gets a nice teller? And how come it's the same teller? Can I begin to see the connection between the quality of my thoughts and feelings as I think about things and the way they show up? And do I notice that I'm getting cause and effect backward? Because quite often the experience I think of as the cause, because then I think about the experience. But in reality, I need to look at the experience as the effect and think back to what was the cause that led me to that. And then if I don't like the effect, I need to start thinking in a way that creates a new cause. I need to recognize the way it works, the cause and effect element. And I need to step in and work at cause. Because if I try to change effect, that's like wrestling the world. You'll lose. But when you deal with effect, when you deal with cause, when you come back in and deal with cause, effect naturally mirrors it. So there's no struggle. The only struggle is the internal disciplining of the mind. You can let the world be whatever it is, because the world's just going to keep showing up according to your belief system, just like it has done since the day you appeared on this planet. That doesn't change. So there's a power in the universe that is greater than you are, and you can use it. And you do use it. I would just like to encourage you, encourage us all, and encourage myself to use it more wisely.